Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, a wounded country in the process of being healed. At a conference in London, Mogadishu signs an international security pact aimed at returning stability to crisis-hit Somalia. Also, authorities on both sides of the Mediterranean struggle to rein in the violence, abuse and dangers associated with the ever-growing trafficking trade that sees hundreds of migrants risking their lives to try and make it to Europe by sea every day. And we head to Kenya for a photography exhibition taking aspects of African life that sailed up under the spotlight and putting them centre of attention. Everyday Africa is a celebration of the little moments that make up a great continent. But first, Somalia's new president welcomed a security pact that was signed on Thursday between Mogadishu and her international partners. The country is struggling with the aftermath of decades of conflict and the ongoing threat of al-Shabaab extremists. It's also facing the devastating effects of drought and stands on the brink of famine. But the agreement signed at a conference in London should help prop up the army and the fragile state. Duncan Woodside followed the day for Eye on Africa.
Underscoring the importance of stabilising Somalia to global security, summit attendees included US Secretary of Defence James Mattis, several African heads of state and UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Many were keen to display their confidence in Somali President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo's ability to eliminate his country's status as a haven for Islamic extremists and for pirates. One of his biggest achievements so far has been an agreement with Somali federal states on a new security architecture.
The security pact that we are proposing at this conference will build on the historic agreement between the federal government of Somalia and the federal member states over the size, location, financing, command and control of the future Somali army and police.
Somalia's president called for a removal of remaining restrictions on arms imports once his government has been able to secure better control over the military's supply chains.
The long-standing arms embargo on Somalia severely restricted our ability to procure heavy weapons despite the partial lifting of the embargo in 2013. Time has come for Somalia to be able to get access to qualitatively better equipment.
But his country remains heavily dependent upon the African Union mission in Somalia, known as AMISOM.
I therefore call on this conference to endorse the call by the troop-contributing countries and the African Union for urgent measures to support and strengthen AMISOM.
A lack of equipment, including UN-funded attack helicopters, has been a major bone of contention for troop-contributing countries, including Kenya, which have suffered major casualties as a result of al-Shabaab attacks against field bases.
Duncan Woodside there for us. Now, 3 Nigerians have been arrested in Sicily, accused of having killed, tortured and sexually abused other African would-be migrants whilst they were trapped in Libya. Witnesses accused the trio of having jailed and held them for ransom in the city of Sabrata. Italian police have also arrested a Libyan man suspected of having shot dead a migrant from Sierra Leone travelling on a dinghy from Libya to Italy. Now, the victim, Kelly Osman, was reportedly killed last week after failing to take his hat off after having been ordered to do so by smugglers. Now, migrants continue to try and make the dangerous trip to Europe by crossing the Mediterranean. This week, the Libyan Coast Guards already intercepted hundreds of travellers taking the dangerous journey.
30 kilometres north of Libya's coast, these migrants were on the verge of being rescued by Sea-Watch, an NGO preparing to pick them up for passage to Europe.
We found a wooden boat. We left the side of our boat, taking life vests to the refugee boat. As we approached, we realised it was massively overcrowded, hundreds and hundreds of people on this boat. And then our interpreter just started to talk to them and find out some more details when we had an alarm call from the Sea-Watch 2 that said we're being approached by a Libyan warship. And when we looked over our shoulders, there was a fast boat had just come round the bows of Sea-Watch and was heading towards us at high speed.
That unwelcome intervention was by the Libyan Coast Guard. Taking the 300 migrants back to Tripoli, it brushed off Sea-Watch's accusations that it had illegally repatriated them while the boat was in international waters.
It was trying to assist in the search and rescue. It was in our territorial waters, and in search and rescue operations, the Libyan Coast Guard has priority.
The International Organization for Migration says 20,000 migrants in Libya are currently detained by criminal gangs. Shakriya, a Syrian refugee, is devastated at being sent back.
I left the war in Syria and went to Libya, which was also at war. I'm now trying to go to Europe to join my children, and because it respects human rights.
After the closure of the migrant routes through Turkey and Greece, Libya has become the key departure point for those hoping to cross to Europe by sea. Last year, nearly 200,000 people made the deadly journey.
Now, South Sudan's ousted army chief said that he'll be returning to Juba even after his dismissal earlier this week. General Paul Malong's removal follows the resignations of a string of senior military figures who allege ethnic bias in the army fighting one side of a 3-year civil war. Now, some have vowed to overthrow President Salva Kiir. Meanwhile, a ceasefire he announced weeks ago has yet to materialize. The UN is concerned that fighting between Kiir's forces and those of his rival, Riek Machar, is just intensifying.
Recently, what we're worried about is the escalation and the mobilisation of youth from both sides. They are, from what we can understand, they are heavily armed, and therefore, as a result of that, any clashes could result in a large number of casualties.
Now, more than 1,000 people have been killed in an outbreak of meningitis in Nigeria. Although the country's Centre for Disease Control said that it believes the spread of the illness is slowing, children in the northern states of Zamfara, Sokoto, Katsina and Kebbi have been the worst affected by this new strain of meningitis C. After the first cases were reported last November, a mass vaccination program was launched. Well, staying with Nigeria, it said that it's already begun serious negotiations for the release of the remaining Chibok girls being held by Boko Haram extremists. Around 110 captives still remain from the almost 300 schoolgirls originally abducted from boarding school in the northeast of the country 3 years ago. Last weekend, another 82 were freed after the government exchanged them for 5 jailed Boko Haram members. Now to Kenya now, where a photography exhibition is trying to shed light on aspects of African life that seldom end up under the spotlight. Everyday Africa started out as an Instagram feed of images capturing day-to-day moments from across the continent. Those images are now on display at the French Cultural Centre in Nairobi and have inspired a book. Clément Bonnereau tells us more.
Breaking stereotypes one image at a time. The Everyday Africa project started out as an Instagram feed in 2012. The aim to change negative perceptions of the continent. A book has now been published, featuring 267 photographs by 30 photographers from around the world.
Making a book, it's not just about the photography. We've also included the comments people leave on Instagram and so on, sort of the good, the bad, the ugly. And the idea there is that we're also preserving how people feel about Africa right now at this time and how people communicate today via social media.
Some of the best photos in the book are now on display at the French Cultural Centre in Nairobi. Many of the contributing photographers include bloggers and journalists from across Africa. They say debunking clichés about the continent has been a rewarding yet challenging experience.
Pictures are very important. When I'm taking a photo, what I want to do is to arouse the curiosity of the person who will see that picture. I want them to ask themselves what was happening there. I don't just take pictures for the sake of it. I want them to have an impact.
The Everyday Africa project has sparked a global movement, inspiring dozens of feeds on Instagram, most aimed at deepening understanding of cities, countries and continents worldwide. The Everyday Africa exhibition will also be hosted in Casablanca, New York, Istanbul and Delhi.
I have to say I'm a big fan of Everyday Africa. That is, though, where we're going to have to leave it now for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information. Everywhere. In all situations. On every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24, a different take on the news.